been talking about all of the realities of what it means to work on economics and to work for economic justice from a perspective that really does look at it from an intersectional and interlinked perspective, and as feminists, right? So that's a specific framework. And the reason why we do that is because one of the things that we say is that the economy is so complex, right? And it's so interlinked. So even though we can find lots of examples, and I really hope that it is that kind of discussion next Friday, because I think once you do have these kinds of conversations, it becomes very, very clear how it has to be part of our everyday conversation and how it has to become part of our organizational work. So it's about the individuals, it's about family, it's about workplaces and community, and it's about all kinds of interrelationships, and they are of many different kinds, right? And feminist economists, what they try to do is they talk about a thing called, rather than, so the easiest way to say it is, we take away the center. So we say, we are not here just to talk about profit or even primarily about profit. Put that to the side. What we are talking about is we are replacing that with what we call social provisioning. The idea that we need to be placing care and well-being in the center of why we have economies. Why do we trade, right? Different things. It's because we have our needs and we have our wants. We want to make those exchanges, and those exchanges have to be positive for everyone who's involved. And that's not a silly, naive kind of argument. That's about saying, for our planet to survive, for us to survive in the way that we've been able to experience it, we have to make those really big choices now. And that means that we have to, one, so this is the 5 that, maybe you can take away when this goes up online and take back to your communities, is the incorporation of care and unpaid labor as fundamental economic activities. What do you mean by that? That means when a government is putting the budget together every year, they should be thinking about the fact that all of these economic relationships are based, they're sitting on the bodies of people. And so many of those bodies are women and LGBTQI people and other people who are experiencing violence, who maybe are the ones who are not getting the jobs, who maybe are being left out of decision-making. So all of these realities are that 76%, imagine, think about that for a minute, 76% of unpaid labor in the world today, this is 2019 figures, is by women. 76% of unpaid labor is by women. And yet, when you look at different regions of the world, that's not reflected in our leadership, right? That's not reflected in the policies that we create. That's not reflected in the way that we treat women and girls and LGBTQI people and people in rural areas and old people. That's not reflected in our budget every year. So that's the first one. How do we change that? And how do we build movements that are strong enough to change that? And then the second one is, we have to use well-being as a measure of economic success. So we have to change the way we measure. So for instance, when a state looks at whether it calls itself, have I had a good year or not? It's the same as when we do it. We say, has it been a good year for me? We have certain things that we measure. So one of the things that feminists and ecological economists say is, then well-being should be as much a measure as something like profit or gross national product or GDP, or whether, export, the amount of export dollars. All of these issues are important, yes, but so too is how well our population is doing. To me, another measure of success would be, are our population healthy? Are there less diseases that are being experienced, right? Because if we have the highest levels, for instance, one of the highest rates of cervical cancer for women, then we're not doing very well economically as well. That means we are not putting the right amount of resources and energy into that problem. So it's also about where do we put our attention, what problems are important enough for us to put our energy into as people of a certain country, and then as a region, and then as the world. Okay, so that's the second. And then the third is, when we think about economics, do all of us do an analysis of power? Do we think about who in our region has power and who doesn't? Do we think about the countries that get to say the most and that get to decide the most? And more than that, knowing it is one thing, but then do we do anything about it to change that? Are we able to do anything to shift that, even if it's only gradually over time? Because if we're not doing that, then why do we keep talking about sustainable development? How is it sustainable if nobody ever challenges the power asymmetries? Because if we're just sitting in our jobs and collecting our wages in these big development, and government offices, but nothing is shifting for the people, then there's something very fundamentally wrong with the power relations. And doesn't matter how many gatekeeping, people you have. It means if something's going wrong, it will start to show in the system. It'll show because people are unwell, because they're poor, because things are going wrong within the country. It'll show up. So that's 3. Are we doing the analysis? Brave analysis. And then the 4th is, are we including, this is an interesting one, ethical goals and values? Often when you start to talk about ethical goals and values or principles nowadays, people kind of look at you like, oh, okay, she's rabbiting on again about these principles, right? But if you don't have those principles, then you don't have red lines. Then everybody keeps making those red lines go lower and lower. And then you start making really poor decisions on economics. So one poor decision, for instance, might be, we have this great mangrove policy, and then we are cutting down mangroves. And this government part is not talking to this government part. And so that is a problem of economic policy. And we have to fix that problem that is about communications, but is also about power and politics, right? So there are issues around ethical goals and values that need to be fixed. And then the last one is, are we looking at difference and inclusion? Not just naming them, not just tick box, we had women in the room, but are there changes that are happening because those people are in the room talking about their issues? Is something changing for our frameworks and our policies and our development plans? Because otherwise, no point having us in the room until something shifts. So that's 5 concrete things that we can do, right? And then this is a little bit more about the ideas, this next page, very quickly. Absolutely central to any set of work is the work that takes place in the households and communities. That has to be part of how we define economics. So if we don't talk about unpaid care, domestic and communal work, then very, very hard to be talking about feminist economics. And then the second part is we care about, like there's a young woman who just the other day was putting on Twitter a really lovely post from her set of work in the Caribbean. And she's talking about, we've got to be able to recapture the language of pleasure and health and well-being, that it's not just about surviving, it's about how do we thrive? How do we have a country that is helping people to thrive? And I feel like that kind of narrative, the positive narrative, is very, very hard now, because people are finding it hard in terms of economics to find joy and to find health and well-being. And then the third one is, which is really important in the set of work that we're trying to do on poverty to power, but it should be all of us, right? Is those who are most affected by an economic system have to be the first of those that are analyzing and acting on that issue. So if poverty work is only done at a distance, and never by talking to those who are experiencing, and never working with them on work plans or trying to get through some of these actions that will help both the everyday and the long term, then really you can't call it pro-poor policy. You can't call it pro-poor programs, because it's so far away that it's just talking at a problem. It's not actually doing anything about it. And then the last point is, how do you decenter humans and recenter non-human species? How do we talk about the rights of nature? Indigenous peoples in many parts of the world are already doing this, but not everyone, because many of us have become very colonized and we don't think about the rights of nature. So one of the questions that I have, for instance, is when we're doing work around biodiversity, do we actually know what plants and animals are the most important in our local community? Whatever our local community is, doesn't have to be rural, it can be anywhere. Do we know which ones are most important in our particular area to keep that ecosystem flourishing? What are the things that really help our community, both human and non-human, to flourish? Because if we don't even know our place, then how do we protect our place? And we've talked about this before. The economics of ecology only works if we feel a connection to that which is not human, because otherwise we won't look after it if there's a distancing of us from that. So that's what we need to do. We need a decolonial degrowth, right? We need to combine that degrowth work with the work that we're doing on ecological and climate justice. So economics work has to be with climate change work, right? That's basically what we say. Do human rights work, do economic work, do ecological and climate work. And this last point is really important, which is it's the way that society functions that needs to change. Don't worry about whether it's a big word or it's in language, or how does the water system work, and does it work for everybody? And is it done in a way that is economically sound? Or is it only going to those who have money in the urban centers, whatever country you live in, right? If you are talking about solar, does solar get to everybody? Does everybody have a solar that is maintained, or they just get a nice brand new one and then nobody comes to help them with it 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the track? Do people who need a borehole have the chance to get a borehole to access water from the water table in a safe and healthy way? Or is it all going to water that will be sold overseas to rich people? Where is the money going? Where are the resources being used? Is it for the people who are here, or is it for someone else? And if we are going to challenge, and we're going to try and do it in new ways with agroecology and all these things, when do we actually start? And who gets to start? Who decides? Is it just what the ministries say, or are there communities who are pushing now and saying, we want to be part of that? Yeah, we really want to be part of that. Because we, again, nothing's going to move until we are making that claim as people, where we are saying we want to be part of something different, something more. Yep. And I really love this. I don't know if you can see it. I hope you can see it. What is degrowth? So this idea in economics that everything has to grow, 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 that's your neoliberal capitalism. That's the influence, is that we are in one never ending, you know, we go in the spaceship to the stars, as Lani said. The reality is we have a really complex planet that has a living sphere, and we have to maintain that. We are already 4 out of the 9 planetary boundaries we've crossed. 4 out of 9 already. We have crossed the threshold of safety. So degrowth is required. That doesn't mean that we don't have our needs met. We absolutely have to have our needs met as humans, right? Maslow's needs, the whole lot, not just the little basic ones, but the whole lot of human beings. but it means that we have to work in a totally different way. What do you mean, Noelene? It's not just about money, right? It's about sustainability. It's about circularity. It's about cooperation. It's about useful production. I love that one. What is not needed should not be made. You don't need 5,000 types of buckets. You just need particularly good ones that work, right? And humans, we need to think about that. The next one is important. Sharing, sufficiency, but not excess. Do you need 5 cars within a family? Is that really what we require? Local production, work-life balance, relational goods, and the last one is really just joy, right? So degrowth is not about the market. It is about redesigning what we consider economy. So really look up degrowth. There's a whole set of work around it, and it's starting to move very, very quickly because people are realizing that that chart still keeps going up. We are not getting done what we need done. So we have to propose something specific that is different. And one of the proposals on the table that is looking good is degrowth. But of course, obviously, the corporations don't like it, right? So transformative change from local to global. I'm not going to go through these, but to say there are many, many things that we can do. Many, many things that we can do. And all of these we need to keep trying. And many of the groups on this call are already working on these. Yep. So the last couple of slides is to say, in the Poverty to Power network, for instance, we are ensuring that women in poverty networks are directly working on issues of poverty. What do you mean, Noelene? Well, we mean that actually they were doing the participative analysis. They sat in this room and they did the analysis. Not us, they did the analysis. We provided some of the tools and we will write that up, and that will go to the government from the network of women who are working on that. Because who would be better to hear from than people who are experiencing those issues? But that means that we have to make that commitment in solidarity to each other to do it, right? To do it in proper ways. And that means that we have to do lots of other things. To be there present, not just for that, not just to do analysis, but to be present in the material and the structural in different kinds of ways. So these are just some of, the issues that we're working on right now. And it'd be interesting to hear from you all what you're doing on poverty issues, right? And many of these you've seen, but just to reiterate, when you look at it with the lens of economic justice, then you realize why it is we're doing this. It's not just about climate, it's about economics and about being responsible for each other, being solidarious in our economics. It's about working out, how can you say that you're working on issues of gender justice when women don't have water and sanitation in the places where they live? How are people who are menstruating going to get through their monthly cycle without that? Sorry, it doesn't seem to be moving, Ben. I think it's going slow now. Yeah, that's okay. Can people still hear me? I'm just closing off now. So yeah, so there's SRHR kits that are part of this work. That's also economic justice, right? There's aquaponics and food security work that's going on right now. There's the issues around how we are going to produce more food, about biodiversity. How are women going to make mats when they're telling us that the voivoi is not even available? So if the voivoi isn't available, how exactly are they going to produce these responsibilities that they're required to do as women within our villages and our settlements? So that means that if we are going to be really in solidarity, then we're going to help them get that, which is what we are doing right now. Because come the songos, come all the big meetings, come all the rituals of life, somebody is doing that work. And a lot of times it's either not enough money or it's unpaid care work that they're doing. And that's why we're doing, again, this ecological center that's in Tailevu is happening because of economics. It's happening because we know that in the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, we are going to have to be able to be better at doing the work of agroecology. So we're trying to build a place where we can experiment. And it'll have conference and knowledge center, a greenhouse and a nursery to grow some of those seeds and to make those connections with other farmers who can help us to get those shoots out to different communities around the country that we've already started doing. The agroecology, some farming, some aquaculture, a medicine garden to experiment with which of the most used herbs are in place right now in villages, craft production. There's all kinds of things that we'll be able to experiment within that place, dependent on how much area we have to play with, right? So I'd love to hear of any other economic justice proposals that are going forward in different countries around the region. It's very slow right now. And I want to end on this, which is, we know very, very clearly that we have to move from humans at the top of the chain to humans within what's called a cosmocentrism.